Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to tonight's episode of NTV Europe's celebrity talk show, Talking Point. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmad. In our studios today, we have been lucky to find and get Mr. Ian D. Richardson. He is a well-known journalist, broadcast journalist. He has worked with BBC. Presently, he is writing. He has written a number of books, and two of his books we will be discussing today. Apart from that, we'll be discussing a lot of things. He has been in China, and he has seen world leaders from a very close quarter. So we will talk to him about his experience and the world today and the world that is going to be tomorrow. Thank you. Ian, how are you today?
Fine, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Grateful to you, honored that you were able to come today despite the very cold weather.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Ian, you started your life very early as a writer. As there is I saw a picture on your website, or probably blog, that you have raised your raised feet, you have reached a typewriter, you're trying to tap away something. Do you remember what it was?
Well, I can't remember what it was, of course, but I think I was 4 years old. But it was my dad's typewriter. He was the editor of the local newspaper. And I guess, like a lot of young children, particularly boys, they want to be like their dad. So I was trying my luck at typing. I have no idea what I wrote. It was probably rubbish.
Or twinkle, twinkle. You said your dad was editor of a local newspaper, so I won't be wrong if I said that journalism and writing runs in the genes.
Well, I think it does, but strangely enough, I never intended to be involved in journalism. I worked after school in the small town in the Australian bush where we lived. After school, I worked for a watchmaker, and I used to repair clocks and well, I didn't do the watches. That was the clever stuff. My boss did that, but I did some of the clocks and things, and I was planning to be a watchmaker, and the apprenticeship was all set up and everything. Then my father came in one day and had a word to the watchmaker, and next thing I knew was that I was being told that, well, I'm sorry, your father needs you in the newspaper business and printing business, and I'm not able to offer you a watchmaker's apprenticeship. So what I didn't know then was that my father was dying, and that's why he wanted me to go into the business. He needed
and that was the time to move.
Yes, to help. And so after he died from cancer, my mother took the business over, and I continued and worked with the newspaper.
What was your age then?
I think I was 16. Yes, I was very young, because these days people don't leave school so early. But no, I left school when I was 16 to begin my printing apprenticeship, and then I learnt journalism as I went along. And when my mother, in a moment of madness, bought 2 more newspapers, she didn't have anyone to run them. So I was then 19.
And you were the chief editor.
And suddenly I became editor of a small paper called the Quambatook Times, and another one, the Manangatang Courier, at 19. So, and that was my experience in my early days of journalism.
Yep. What was your first story that you did? Knew the story?
Well, It's difficult difficult to remember, of course, but one story that does stick out in my mind was that I did this article, which I saw recently in an old file, about Sputnik.
Yeah.
So how everyone was outside in the town watching Sputnik
Yeah, the
go
Russian
over.
ones.
So there was that, and I think I sometimes got a bit what they call bolshy too. I wrote a few stories complaining about things and in the town and how they should be improved, but my mother was very tolerant and just let me get on with it.
Well, you love writing, as I understand, and you grew up in a house which was full of newspapers and people talking about journalism and all that. And you worked for some other newspapers or broadcasting companies in Australia.
Yes, well, my mother remarried and it was decided to sell our newspapers. And I had been working part-time for a commercial radio station in a gold mining city, a former gold mining city called Bendigo. And I was offered a job on the local radio station. Called Radio 3BO Bendigo, and that was my first real experience of journalism, because up to that point I'd been learning myself.
Yeah.
I was learning on the job, whereas when I got to Bendigo I worked for a wonderful editor called David Horsfall, who actually taught me what I should be doing and taught me about broadcast journalism. And while I was in Bendigo I met my wife, Rosemary.
Great. Nice place to meet her.
Yes, it was. It was wonderful.
It's a former gold mining
Yes,
city.
well, we met in a...
You found the gold anyway.
no, I never found any. Well, I did in that respect, yes. Yes, no, we met in the Carlos and Rosita ballroom in Bendigo.
When you came over to London, you said that was in 1968, isn't it?
That's right.
And you joined BBC.
Yes, well, I had a few jobs, various jobs, part-time jobs, and then the BBC offered me a job for 3 months working as a sub-editor at BBC World Service, then at Bush House in London. And that 3 months went on for 27 years.
All this time were you with the Bush House, in Bush House?
No, I was with Bush House most of the time, but then in 1991, World Service Television News, which later became BBC World News, was being set up, and I had been in charge of the World Service foreign correspondence, and I'd been doing a little bit of work for the start-up, but eventually I was asked would I move to Television Centre full-time, and that's what I did for the first 2 or 3 years. Then they wanted to set up Arabic television, and so I was called away to do that.
Oh, I was looking forward to exchange a few pleasantries with you in Arabic, but as you said that you didn't, you had it.
Well, the truth is that I was given 3 months to set up Arabic television.
Right.
I mean, I had other people doing it with me, but if it hadn't been set up, it would have been my fault. That's a very, very short time to set up a television network on that scale.
Or to learn a language.
And to learn a language, and I understand Arabic is not all that easy.
Yep.
And so someone said to me, well, are you going to learn Arabic, Ian? And I said, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to learn Arabic, or do you want me to get this channel on air? And so it was a no-brainer, really. I learnt a few words of Arabic.
Where was it based?
That was based in Television Centre in Shepherd's Bush, alongside BBC World Television.
Right. When did you arrive in China, in Beijing?
Well, that was actually when I was still working at Bush House. Part of my job was then going out as what you might call a field manager with the big stories, and I would be taking a team along with me, and we'd go into an area where there was a big story, a city where there was a big story, and I'd have to do that. But one of the main jobs I used to do was follow Gorbachev around when he had all these summit meetings. Now, in 1989, he was off to Beijing to meet the Chinese leadership, and that was when the students and workers realised that if they could stage a great big demonstration, while Gorbachev was there, the Chinese leadership wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So I went there just thinking it was going to be a routine Gorbachev story, but it wasn't, as you know, and I was there for a month and hardly slept. I learned how to sleep on 2 hours, to survive on 2 hours a night.
Do you remember anything, particularly anything exciting of those nights or days that you were there during the Tiananmen Square uprising?
Yes, well, I think I was astonished when I first went there, because I had naively assumed that it would just be an Asian Russia, an Asian Moscow, as it were, because I've been to Moscow a lot. And I was surprised at certain things, like, for instance, all the students and workers had taken part in the demonstrations had these machines, which would send signals. What do they call them? But which was unbelievable to me. Where in Moscow you couldn't even own a typewriter without a license, and I was also surprised at the friendliness that I got from, and we
Chinese.
all got from the Chinese students, because they all listened to the BBC. And they, they do what they could to help us.
How did you communicate with them?
Well, a lot of them spoke English, of course. Learned it off the BBC. But also I had a team with me, and I had some excellent translators with me. But most of the time I could speak to them because they knew enough English to be able to communicate. But I suppose, going back to your original question about one of the most exciting moments, I think, was when we heard that the troops were being moved into the outskirts of Beijing. And so I got a taxi, and this was another amazing thing. You could get in a taxi in Beijing and they wouldn't be alarmed, whereas in Moscow you were a foreigner and they didn't really care much. They certainly wouldn't help you out. Whereas when I said to this taxi driver, who spoke a little English, that I heard the troops had turned up and they were on the other side of the Great Wall of China, he said, "Oh, I'll take you there, I'll take you there." So he took me to the Great Wall of China, and we got up to one of those tourist viewing spots. And
did you have your camera with you?
Well, there were, one of those tourist telescopes, but it was on the wrong side. It was looking down onto the city, whereas we could see on the other side that were all the troops. So between the two of us, we dragged this telescope across the other side. Now, how we never got arrested, I do not know, but we had a beautiful view of all the troops gathering there.
Very interesting. We need to take a break, and then when we come back, we will go back to China.
Fine.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be back after this very short break. Thank you.